of God, Father Silver, who also has a really important part in the history of Our Lady of Lujan. We're going to learn a little bit about him as well. And from that, we'll go to a second point, which will be a little bit about the history of Our Lady of Lujan and our religious family. The sort of development of the devotion and the prominence of Our Lady in our institute. And then lastly, I wanted to sort of steer it towards something maybe an application, something that we can really take away from it. So it'd be something titled Our Lady of Lujan and all of us here present. And with that, what I want to do is I want to look at these key individuals that we're going to mention: Manuel Costa, Doña Ana de Matos, and Father Silver, and also Our Lady, to extract some key virtues or salient characteristics that they present to the history of Our Lady of Lujan. And then I also want to add a little bit of my own story, a tiny bit. And that's not for reasons of indulgence. So it's not to indulge in a testimony of any sorts, but it's more for demonstration, because I think sometimes devotions and things of this sort, they can sometimes stay on a very surface level, and they don't penetrate us in such a way that I see how this really affects me and pertains to me, as opposed to something that I gravitate towards, or I like the way she looks, or I like the story, or something like that. But to see that, these mysteries, these events, touch us, they penetrate us. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to keep an eye on my time. We're at 7:11, so I went 1 minute over. And I'm going to try to get us there to be ready for our procession and our fagon, because I know basically I'm the only one standing in the way of those things. So I just want to acknowledge that. And the fact that we've had some really great conferences, and this is coming to the end of a lot of really good formation. And so this is kind of the topic itself. We could maybe consider the crown jewel, our Blessed Mother, and in this particular way, Our Lady of Lujan. So, okay. I want to start with this quote, because we have to see this within the lens of divine providence. Okay, and this quote is taken from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 30. The witness of Scripture is unanimous that the solicitude of divine providence is concrete and immediate. God cares for all, from the least things to the great events of the world and its history. That's strong language. The sacred books powerfully affirm God's absolute sovereignty over the course of events. And then it quotes the Psalms: "Our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he pleases." And so it is with Christ, now quoting the book of Revelation: "Who opens and no one shall shut, who shuts and no one opens." And as the book of Proverbs states, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will be established." So the immediate and concrete solicitude of divine providence. So if we want to put it in just a little bit different terms, where he chooses, when he chooses, through whom he chooses, or what instruments he uses, in which way and under what circumstances he chooses. As St. John Henry Newman puts it, he knows what he is about. So divine providence is concrete and immediate. He cares for all and in all, from the least to the great. And so as we sit here today and hear a simple version of this story, because basically I'm giving to you information that everyone else has put together. This is just a simple exposition. But it's a story that involves us. And that's not a bold statement, or it's not a stretch of the imagination to say that it involves you and me. It is our story in a concrete and immediate way, because he is touching us, providing for us through these events. Okay, so the first part, the story of Our Lady of Lujan. So it's a story of two images. This is the general history, and I want to just kind of read through this for you, just to be sure of accuracy and things like that. Migrated to Argentina from Portugal. So coming from a place where the faith flourished, he was saddened by the lack of religious influence in his adopted district. So it was less religious than what he knew in his homeland. And in particular, his village of Sumampa. So he decided to help the situation by building a chapel. And he wrote to a friend in Brazil, asking him to send a small statue of Our Lady for his chapel. And so the friend, unsure of how the farmer wanted Our Lady to be depicted, he sent two. And these two statues were different. One was the Madonna with child, and the other a representation of the Immaculate Conception. And so he sends the images off, which brings us to the river of Lujan. Captain Andrea Juan, who was in charge of this voyage, upon his arrival to Argentina with the images of Our Lady in 2 boxes, put them upon a cart, and they started their journey to the north. And I think you can see the trail of the journey. So from basically here, started the journey from the port, Buenos Aires, up to the north in this direction. And so when they arrived to the shore of the river of Lujan, the crew stopped to spend the night in the inn of Don Rosendo de Oramos. And the next morning he tried to continue his journey to Córdoba and his destination. But it happened that the oxen, already tied to the cart, they just would not move. So no matter how hard they pulled, could not move a single step. Well, this is what happened. They're shipped and they don't move. And so we have here what we call the miracle of the cart. So having camped at the isolated ranch of Don Rosendo de Oramos, early the next morning the wagons and the animals were readied for the rest of their journey. One by one, the carts began to move, and animals were following the directions, except the cart that carried Our Lady, or the two images of Our Lady. And so progress was stalled when the driver was unable to coerce the animals forward. The other drivers in the caravan came to help, but basically all the efforts to move the cart were unsuccessful. And so sensing some strange events transpiring, some mystery taking place, one of those present, who we will see who that is, perhaps not. So with a little bit of divine inspiration, said, "Sir, how about we take one of these crates out of the wagon and let's see if it goes?" He did so, but in vain, because no matter how hard the oxen pulled, the wagon was unmovable. So then the individual said, "Well, let's switch the crates then, and let's see if there's any mystery in this." So he took out the crate that was left and loaded the one that had been removed, and then without further delay, the oxen pulled and the wagon moved without any more difficulty. So they were free to go. And so the crew understood that this was a message from heaven, something miraculous. And that was saying to them that the image had to stay there to be venerated in this place. They understood this. And so what happened is it remained here at the place of Don Rosendo. The statue of the Madonna and Child continued on the journey and arrived safely in Sumampa, where it is still venerated to this day under the title of Our Lady of Consolation. And as the statue of the Immaculate Conception that was taken off the cart, as for this statue, it was solemnly carried to the ranch and placed in a room of its own. And so what happened is this room became so popular that they built a chapel for her, which remained for the next 40 years. So people would come to visit, and the popularity or the devotion to her began to grow. And so the estate had a house, a room with 2 chambers, and at the back of the house a small chapel, and in it with a crucifix, and Our Lady was placed there. And so the primitive building was rustic, not much more than a straw hut, made of sticks and wire, but it was enough to keep her there. And so she was. And that's where she remained. And more or less, as now we transition into the part about some key individuals, this is what happened. She remained there. Miracles became prevalent, and she would sneak out and come back in the morning with dirt on her vestment. So there are many miracles associated with them. They're logged in different books, but countless miracles are associated with her. And some of the key individuals that I'd like to mention now, to continue to highlight the story. The first is servant of God Manuel Costa de los Rios, who is also known as the faithful slave of Our Lady of Lujan. So Manuel was born in 1604 in Cabo Verde, which is an island off the west coast of Africa, which at the time was a Portuguese colony. And he enjoyed freedom until he was 25 years old, when he was taken to the public square in the port of Cabo Verde to be sold as a slave to Brazil. So a sea captain, whose name was Andrea Juan, the captain of the voyage that brought Our Lady of Lujan to Argentina and started traveling towards Sumampa, he bought Manuel Costa for service in late 1629. And so Manuel left Brazil in January 1630 for the port of Santa Maria of Buenos Aires, together with the captain, Andrea Juan. And so historians agreed that Manuel was present and witnessed the miracle of the cart personally. And most are in agreement that he was the one who said, "Sir, take one of the crates out of the wagon and let's see if it moves." And so then he was the one who said, "Change the crates to see if there's any mystery in this." And then he was the one who came to the conclusion that says, "This shows that the image of the Virgin enclosed in this crate must stay here." And so she remained there in that land. And with the death of Rosendo Oramos, Our Lady remained with his estate and was then given care to, ultimately to a priest who cared for the estate. But what's interesting to note is that Manuel Costa, his owner, Andrea Juan, asked him or released him or told him to stay with the lady. So he basically gave him permission, gave him freedom to remain there as he went on. And so from that day forward, Manuel Costa, he became the faithful servant of our Blessed Mother. And he is known for his innocent simplicity, in such a way that he would treat Our Lady with very tender care and familiarity. Ultimately, as we'll see here in this next individual, Ana de Matos, she desired to create a better place for Our Lady. And so Manuel continued to safeguard her and to care for her, this sacred image, as people little by little began to grow in number in venerating the sacred image. Which brings us to Ana de Matos. So in 1671, so some 40 years later, she was the owner of an extensive field upriver, and she asked to transfer the image to her property. And so she bought the image from this priest, whose name was Juan de Oramas, who was the heir of the Rosendo family estate, and he gave it to her, he sold it to her. But her desire was not only to have this image, was not only to take care of it, but also to better promote the devotion and veneration of pilgrims. And so she says, "Because I have a great love to the advocation of Our Lady of the Pure Conception and her holy image, I make a donation to said image of the whole place that she needs for her chapel." And so Ana de Matos fulfilled her promise to build a chapel for her, and in a testimony, she herself says this: "Because I have had and have much love and devotion to the invocation of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception and her holy image, which has been placed in the lands of said Estancia of Lujan, in a separate chapel which has been determined to build again with more decency and capacity, and so that with fervor and perpetual permanence, the aforementioned may be achieved, I grant to the said holy image the site needed for the construction of the chapel." And so she puts it into a better place and creates a better sanctuary chapel for Our Lady. And most agree that the first vestment that was given to her was given by Ana de Matos. The next person that I want to tell you about is Father Jorge Maria Salver. He's also a servant of God. So he was a French missionary priest who was miraculously cured by Our Lady of Lujan. And he devoted his life to her and helped build the present-day basilica. So he was born in France and was ordained a priest. And this is decades later. This is in the 1800s. In fact, he was ordained in 1847. He was ordained in 1871 and was sent in that same year to be a missionary in Argentina. He was a great missionary, and in two different periods went on mission to native lands. And on one of the occasions, he was miraculously saved through the intercession of Our Lady of Lujan. He was basically in the throes of being executed by natives. He was down in the Patagonia area trying to bring back some missionaries and people who had been sequestered and held captive by a tribe, and he went to intervene, and he was then accused of being a spy and ultimately was sentenced to death. But he prayed to Our Lady of Lujan and asked for her intercession, and from that point forward, the natives began to change, the chief as well. In fact, Father Mariano, who's translating this talk, he did a nice presentation. But ultimately, as a result, and why that's important is because as a result of that intervention, he made a vow to her to publish a history of Our Lady of Lujan. He wanted to also spread her devotion completely, as much as he could with all of his energies. And he also vowed to build a sanctuary that was worthy of her beauty. Right, so he published an important historical work on Our Lady of Lujan, which is titled Historia de Nuestra Señora de Lujan. Right, and so this is, and he says in the prologue, written by somebody who conscientiously fulfills a vow made in a supreme conflict to a superior being from whom he has received evident protection and shelter. So he is instrumental in building the basilica that we can visit today, which is a beautiful Gothic cathedral that is magnificent and meant for her honor. And so I just want to read for you the words of Father Salver and how he describes the image itself of Our Lady. He says, the image of Our Lady of Lujan is small. It's about 15 inches high. Her features are minute but well proportioned. Her face is oval. Her countenance is modest, serious, and at the same time sweetly smiling, reconciling both benevolence with its irresistible appeal and the respect due to the majesty of a queen. Her forehead is spacious, her eyes are big, light and blue. Her eyebrows are black and arched, and her nose is somehow aquiline. Her mouth is small, just like an incarnated rose, and her cheeks are rosy. She is slightly looking to the right. The color of her face, though very graceful, is a little bit dark. Her delicate hands are folded close to her chest, as it is the expression of one who humbly prays. The image is clothed with a sky blue mantle adorned with white stars. Underneath such a mantle, she wears a white robe. At the feet of the sacred image, a crescent moon rests upon clouds, which is traditionally found at the feet of the Immaculate Virgin. And then emerging among those clouds, there are 4 graceful, open-winged cherubim. Lastly, we might say that the sacred image has been made of terracotta or baked clay. These are all the words of Father Salver. He says, summing up, we might confess that this ancient sacred image of Our Lady of Lujan is not a work of art, given that the material used in its making is not the best, neither its making is remarkable compared to that of great masterpieces of art. However, it is precious above all in consideration of the innumerable and admirable marvels that by her intercession the divine mercy has deigned to perform due to the pious thoughts that arise in people's minds just by looking at her, and for the profound veneration that our parents professed to her. Remembering the quote on divine providence, this is something that Father Salver appreciated deeply when he looked upon Our Lady of Lujan. This is the beauty that he saw in her. And so I just wanted to take a a quick tour, if you will, of the image itself. So we have the Gothic stripe, which, I was going to point to the computer, is this around here, which has an inscription. It says, "The Virgin of Lujan is the first founder of this villa, or this village." And it is attached to the back of the woman dressed in the sun, so the rays. And this and represents the rays of the sun because the Virgin is totally submerged in that inaccessible light. We have the silver moon at her feet, right here. And oftentimes it is depicted with three coat of arms of Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, because all defects are under her, and because she is mediatrix between Christ, the Sun, S-U-N, and the Church, the moon, is what is described as. We also have her crown, which was ordered to be made in Paris by Father Salver, and it was made by a famous craftsman of the house that did some very important pieces in Notre Dame in Paris. And so he got maybe the greatest artisan of the time to make her crown, and it was made of rings and jewelry of the people that were melted together to create this crown, and it was presented to Pope Leo XIII in 1886. And it was blessed by him, and he gave the verbal permission for the pontifical coronation or canonical coronation, which is the formal crowning of our Blessed Mother by virtue of papal authority. And I was looking through some of the dates, and there's one place, one parish in Mexico that actually did the coronation before Our Lady of Lujan, but had they done the coronation immediately, she would have been the first. We could say the permission granted makes her the first crowned mother of the Americas, so of all of them. Technically, the actual formal ceremony happened after Leo XIII said, yeah, crown her. So they waited to get things done in a very proper way. And ultimately, she was crowned in 1887 on May 8th, which is her feast day, the day that we celebrate today. So it's marked by the day of her crowning. We also have the halo of 12 stars, so up around there. And this is the royal diadem of Mary. And in them, St. Bernard sees 12 prerogatives of graces, so different graces that pertain to heaven. I'm not going to name them all. Those that pertain to, so her heavenly beauty, those that pertain to her bodily purity and magnificence, and those prerogatives that pertain to the celestial beauty of her heart. Okay, so that's just sort of a tour of our Blessed Mother. Second part. Okay, so Our Lady of Lujan and the religious family. Now here, again, I'm taking from the information that was provided, and this, Father Willa did us a great service in a book that was released posthumously, and also basically recounting the events of Our Lady of Lujan and the Institute in a video. And when he was asked about the relationship between the religious family of the Incarnate Word and Our Lady of Lujan, he begins by pointing out what was written on the rays positioned behind the image. And the words say on the actual one, as I said, this is the first foundress of this village. And so Father Wella said that we wanted her to be the primera fundadora, the first foundress of the village of Chañaral, which is where the mother house is, where the institute was founded. And they wanted her to be the foundress. And so he says, the strong devotion to her comes through two great saints primarily, St. Louis de Montfort and St. John Paul II. And St. Louis de Montfort taught us maternal slavery, he says, to the Blessed Virgin. And St. John Paul II was a modern-day saint that taught us what this looked like. And so when he worked, he points out that when JP2 worked in the quarry, he kept a copy of True Devotion in his pocket. And so just a constant and consistent connection with our Blessed Mother was seen in JP2. And as a seminarian, Father Buelo would often pilgrimage to her shrine in order to beg her for holy and priestly and religious vocations. But there's an important thing that I think was very wise and very prudent. Father admits in recounting sort of the relationship, Father Will admits that in the early days of the Institute, he said, I tried to be careful to not speak too much about the Virgin of Lujan. And we say, well, why? And he explains. He said, I tried to avoid talking habitually about the Blessed Virgin Mary as Our Lady of Lujan for two reasons. First, some may forget that all of the titles of Mary refer to the singular Virgin of Mary. The Mother of Jesus and our Mother. She has many titles. There are perhaps more than 30,000 titles of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And he says in Spain alone, some estimate that there are around 22,000. And so the second reason, he says, was to avoid giving the impression that we wanted to force devotion to a particular image. And so he indicates basically that there's a level of sensitivity and appreciation for international devotions. And so he says, thinking about our expansion, it occurred to me to respect the sensibilities of each of the religious and the particular devotion of each of them, that each of them had, and their affection to the Blessed Mother based on their specific regions and countries. And so therefore, for about the duration of 15 years, devotion to Our Lady of Lujan was a devotion that was more on a sort of local level. But then as time went by, he highlights that from the missionaries themselves, a growing desire to identify with and promote more greatly Our Lady of Lujan. And so in 1999, it was determined that they were, he says, more prepared to spread devotion to Our Lady of Lujan in the countries. And so the project of Lujan began, which is basically trying to consolidate and to do research and to put together a good study of Our Lady. And it was born. And so then, little by little, the images began to disseminate, and the missionaries would bring Our Lady to their places of work. And so the project seeks to promote the study of Our Lady of Lujan and to bring her images to the places where we mission. Among many other places, she's found in Hong Kong, United States, Brazil, Tajikistan, Italy, Ukraine, Egypt, Papua New Guinea, and we could keep listing the countries. And so from that point forward, the missionaries began to bring her to all these different places. And it's a really beautiful thing to see how the local individuals are drawn to her and find a real tenderness with the Blessed Mother. And then in 2011, again, at the request of the missionaries, then General Superior Father Walker was hearing requests to then name her formally as the patroness of our institute. And so at the end of 2010 and 2011, he consulted the members of the congregation, and about 98% of the members at that time requested and gave strong arguments as to why she should be named as our patroness. And so in 2012, the Holy See recognized the Blessed Virgin Mary of Lujan officially as our patroness. And the official decree includes the following solemn declaration, and it's really, really powerful. It says, the Holy See confirms the Blessed Virgin Mary, Immaculate and Pure Conception of Lujan, patroness before God of the Institute of the Incarnate Words. This is decreed by the Holy See. And so she is now officially our patroness from that point, which is why we, on May 8th, celebrate her with solemnity, or as a solemnity. And she's now along with us in nearly 50 countries. The third part. What is this, what can we take away from these people? And these people that I want to speak about is Our Lady, Manuel, Doña Ana, and Father Salver. So Mary, she teaches us how to remain. In other words, how to trust in divine providence. So she teaches us how to remain. And there's a beautiful poem that was written by a priest whose name is Father Felipe Jose Maqueda. And he speaks about her eternal election. That by her own choice, her eternal election, that she desired to stay there to help us, to help all those who will be touched by her from that act of remaining, to help us eternally. In other words, from that point to eternity, because ultimately we're talking about salvation. That's what Mary wants. And so it is remarkable that in the story of the history of Our Lady of Lujan, she chooses, right? She chooses, and she opens up this whole new historical event for those lands. She chose the place, she chose the people, she chose the servant that would be with her as her custodian, Manuel. She chose him who was from the coastal region of Africa to be the one who would care for her. And so that's important for us to identify. She chose, she remained. And so we can call to mind the words of our Lord. It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you. Go and bear fruit that will last. And so the same thing can be said about us. Our congregation was born in Argentina. It wasn't born in another country. It was not born in another place. And so she who is the mediatrix of graces, we can say that she chose us. She chose the people, these situations. She chose our congregation in the same way. It was born in this place and not another. And Father Gonzalo Ruiz, who was working in the general house at the time, he relates that we appointed her as our patroness, and this Holy See recognized this appointment, but truly we need to understand that we have not been the ones to choose her. Yes, we have chosen her, but he says this election in reality is she choosing us. So she teaches us how to remain, how to trust in divine providence. Manuel Costa, he teaches us fidelity. So he, plain and simple, devoted himself to her. He spent time with her. He gave his life to her. He did the humble, simple work of paying attention to her. Again, from the outside, it may not be anything magnificent. It wasn't that he was, think of the Fatima events where the children are seeing these grand visions and things. He was a humble servant being faithful to her. And that's something that we can take away from and learn from. Fidelity. Fidelity in the small things that are required of slaves of Mary. Attending to the things that she asks of us. The next is Anna. So Anna, we can learn from this, that she gives of her goods, and she gives with generosity and with foresight. Right? So she's the one who bought the image and made a place for it and gave her land for the chapel. So she donated it, and ultimately she became an instrument in the growth of her devotion. And there's an observation that Father Huela makes that is really sound about Doña Ana. He says, the foresight of this woman is noteworthy. So many times good is done because we think about just generosity. We think about, okay, I'm just going to give this and I'm doing my good deed. But he notes that she gives, and so he says sometimes good is done, but good is not done well. She could have donated, for example, and not taken charge of her. Then it might have occurred to some bishop or priest to take the image of the Virgin of Lujan to Buenos Aires or elsewhere. But she, he says, was a woman of foresight. And so recognizing that the image should stay in those lands. That she was going to give her goods and give them in a good way. That was intuitive to what Our Lady wanted. The next one is Father Salver. We can learn from the giving of his talents. So if you think about it, stewardship is often reduced to time, talent, and treasure. Manuel gives of his time, Ana of her treasure. Father Salver gives of his talents. And so he was somebody who was magnanimous, and this magnanimity was born from gratitude. So he recognized what Our Lady had done for him, and out of sheer gratitude and responsibility to the vow that he made and to the good that she did, he desired to make good on that deal, so to speak, by promoting the history, safeguarding the history, and also building a basilica, a magnificent basilica where she deserved to be housed. And so I conclude now with this question: what can I add? Now, the last portion, as I mentioned, I say this simple anecdote, not for reason of indulgence, but more for a demonstration. Because as I said, devotions need to sort of hit home. And I think my story is everyone's story that is sitting here today. And there are two parts to that story for me. So, where I come from and where I am now. So I come from western Kansas, and I looked on the map, and it's more or less the same distance as Cape Verde, which is where Manuel came from. So it's like thousands of miles away from Lujan. Basically, has nothing to do with geographically with Lujan. Thousands of miles away. And moreover, the Institute of the Incarnate Word is nowhere to be found in those lands, or at least at that time when there's not a foundation there to date. And Our Lady of Lujan was not there before I discovered my vocation. She's there now, but she wasn't there then. And so my vocational journey began through the IVE and a seminarian asking a simple question to me. Have you ever thought about being a priest? That was it. And from that point forward, I, who was going to college and planning to get a job and get married, I couldn't get that thought out of my mind. And so that, as I was thinking about it, if all of these things come through Mary, and they do, she stopped me in my tracks. I'm kind of like the dumb oxen that were there carrying the cart that day. I don't want to liken myself to Manuel or anyone else, but those animals, the beasts of burden, that was me. Not moving forward anymore. Well, the rest brings me here today. Our Lady of Lujan, from whom all graces are brought to us through her, brought me here today. I did not discover, the fact of the matter is I did not discover my vocation in another place. My priestly and religious vocation was not brought along another path, but this one. And all of you here today are here for some reason or another. This is something that some of the priests have been saying throughout the week. Perhaps the priests or sisters are in your parish or school or near your university or whatever the case may be. But the point being, you are here, and you are here by way of God's grace. And He has drawn you in a particular and a concrete way, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And that your relationship with God has grown or been transformed or been invited to another level in some way, shape, or form, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And Our Lady plays a role in that, just as the Catechism reminds us about divine providence. So that's the first part, where I'm from. But where I'm at now, I think also is something to contribute. So, personally, I think there's something very similar at Our Lady of Peace. Now, I realize at first glance this may seem laughable. These two images are anything but similar, and their stories are in many respects just the exact opposite. So if you take a look, one morning I snuck out with Our Lady and put her right there. Can't even find her. And at Our Lady of Peace, it's a miracle for me to be able to get from the rectory to the foot of the statue with a sacred image without being stopped. So I was actually Sister Talpa stopped me. She caught me. But I put her there just to kind of give a comparison there. And so Our Lady of Lujan is very small. In fact, she's about the size of Mary's big toe. Is very so Our Lady of Peace is 32 feet, and she's made of welded stainless steel. Our Lady of Lujan was 16 inches, and she is ceramic. Our Lady of Lujan was transported by oxen and did not reach her destination, whereas Our Lady of Peace was transported by a tractor trailer and made it all the way across the United States to her point of arrival. So these are the material aspects, and I think they're very similar. I think what is very similar is that Mary chooses her spots. And although the images are very different, the silent majesty and the maternal presence is no doubt felt. It is definitely not nothing. Mary's peace is felt there. There is devotion to her that is fostered by Catholic and non-Catholic alike. And so many people come to visit her because they believe that she is the woman who prays for them. So if you think about how Father Salver described Our Lady of Lujan, she was a woman positioned like this, one who humbly prays. And so people go to her and they see this is a woman who will pray for me. And so I have the privilege of seeing firsthand the effect of Mary staying in a particular spot and what that has and what that does to people. They tend to remain as well. They come and they remain with her. She who is there for them. And so in the form of popular piety, the people simply confirm what the church teaches. Mary intercedes for those in need. And this is something that the church sees as part of Mary's role in the life of all of us. She is compassionate and attentive to the needs of others. And this is the way Lumen Gentium describes Mary's intervention at Cana. She's moved with pity. And so she's seeking the conversion of sinners and the salvation of souls, plain and simple. So thinking of these four people, the Blessed Mother, Manuel, Anna, Father Salver, they remind us that God counts on us, and his plans and the solicitude of divine providence is concrete and immediate, and nevertheless, he counts on our free collaboration, on the oblation of our lives, and on the generosity with which we follow the inspirations that the Holy Spirit gives us in the depths of our hearts. And so the precious image of the clean and pure Virgin of Lujan is linked to a great extent in God's plans to the fidelity of these few we have mentioned, and there are others. And tomorrow, some aspects of God's plan will be linked to our fidelity, to the fervor with which we pronounce our yes to him and to her, to choose to remain with them. And whether we realize it or not, whether we want to admit it or not, whether we like it or not, the good of many souls will depend on that. But let us have confidence and repeat the words of Manuel, I belong to the Virgin and nothing else. Why such confidence? Well, he simply looked at her hands and noticed what Mary was doing. They were folded and she was praying for us. May Our Lady of Lujan bring peace to the world. May she reign in the hearts of many, and may she lead us to a closer and deeper union with her Son, Jesus. That's it. Sorry I went on.
Thank you, Father. 2 questions.
Or one. Una pregunta.